The air was sharp and still, a deep chill that crept into your bones and settled there for good. Michigan's forests have a way of swallowing sound, muting everything except the crunch of boots and the faint, shivery hiss of the wind against the trees. I'd been cutting timber for almost a decade by then, and I thought I'd seen everything those woods could throw at me. But I hadn't seen the Dogman. That morning had started like any other. My breath hung in thick clouds around me as I set out, boots punching holes in the frost-crusted earth. The crew was thin, just a couple of us that day, hauling our saws and gear into the woods outside Reed City. Rumors of sightings had rippled through town for years, usually from hunters and old-timers who swore they'd seen something. A hulking figure that looked almost like a wolf but stood on two legs, taller than any man and with eyes like embers. But we were practical men. Laughing off the stories came easy enough, until that day. We'd been at it a few hours, axes swinging, saws biting into the frozen bark. I worked alone in my corner of the woods, spaced a good distance from the others for safety. A fog started creeping in, swirling through the trees until visibility dropped to barely 20 feet. My breath quickened, but I forced myself to shrug it off. It wasn't the first time I'd felt uneasy in the woods, though this felt different. A dense silence settled around me, thicker than usual, broken only by the low groan of tree limbs swaying overhead. I was sharpening my axe when I felt it, a prickling sensation along the back of my neck, the kind of feeling you get when someone's watching you, even though you're alone. I glanced around, seeing nothing but fog and shadows. Then, from somewhere deep within the trees, came the faint sound of something moving, slow and deliberate. Heavy footfalls, far too heavy to be a deer. My heart began pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely more than a whisper, hanging in the mist. Nothing. Only silence. Then a shape appeared, shadowy, huge, blending almost perfectly into the forest. It moved in and out of my vision, keeping just far enough away that I couldn't make out the details. But I could tell it was massive, standing at least 7 feet tall. My mind raced to make sense of it. A bear? No, bears didn't walk upright like that. A trick of the fog? But every time I blinked, it was still there, inching closer, vanishing and reappearing between the trees. I forced my feet to back up, the crunch of the frosty ground sounding absurdly loud. I fumbled for the radio clipped to my belt and managed to croak out, "Hey, anyone nearby? I think—" My voice caught as I struggled to find the words. "I think I'm seeing something out here." Static crackled back at me. Then Rick's voice came through. "What do you mean, something?" But I couldn't answer. The creature stepped forward just enough for me to see it clearly. It stood in the clearing now, fully visible. A creature with the body of a man but covered in coarse dark fur that rippled as it moved. Its limbs were grotesquely long, and its hands, no, claws, hung by its sides, each tipped with nails like black, crooked daggers. And its head. It was unmistakably lupine, with a snout lined in jagged teeth and eyes that burned yellow like coals, fixed directly on me. My breath caught, but I knew better than to run. In the wild, you don't turn your back on something like that. Slowly I raised my axe, more to steady myself than anything else. The Dogman tilted its head, studying me with a kind of curiosity that felt wrong, too human. It took a step closer, its claws scraping against the stones and dirt with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. My legs wanted to run, every instinct screaming at me to get away, but I stayed rooted, feeling those eyes boring into my very soul. Then it smiled, a horrific toothy grin that chilled me to the marrow. My radio crackled to life again. "Are you seeing the Dogman?" Rick's voice sounded strained, almost scared. I didn't even realize my finger was on the button until I heard his voice and snapped back to reality. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, I am." And just like that, the Dogman lunged forward, its muscles rippling under the fur. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own boots, falling to the ground as it loomed above me, close enough now that I could smell its foul, earthy scent, like rot and blood. Its jaws opened, a growl rumbling up from somewhere deep in its chest. I couldn't move, paralyzed by the sheer, primal terror that washed over me. But then, a distant shout shattered the silence. Mitch! It was Rick's voice. He must have heard my desperate breathing over the radio. A light flickered through the fog as he came closer, and for a split second, I looked away from the creature. When I looked back, the dogman was gone. I don't remember much of the scramble back to camp. Rick kept asking what I'd seen, but I was shaking too hard to form words. We left that patch of forest and headed back to town. I don't know if he believed me, and I wasn't sure I believed it myself. But one thing was certain, whatever I'd seen out there wasn't natural. Back in town, the old-timers had plenty to say. "That dogman's been here longer than any of us," one grizzled man told me over a stiff drink. "Ain't many who see it and live to tell the tale." They all nodded knowingly, as though they'd known it was just a matter of time before one of us lumberjacks had a close encounter. I left Michigan not long after that, abandoning the only life I'd ever known. I told myself it was because of the cold, or the work, or just the itch to move on. But really, I knew why I couldn't stay. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hulking figure, those burning eyes, that mocking grin. Sometimes on quiet nights, I still hear it, the scrape of claws, the low, rumbling growl echoing through my dreams. And every time I wonder if one day I'll open my eyes to find it standing at the foot of my bed, watching me, waiting. The dogman doesn't forget, and neither will I.